Are you guys ready for Mary? Mary! I think we're about the same height, so you should be good. You know how it goes.
Yeah, we're about the same height. Okay. I'm the baby of the family, or let me say, I was the baby of the family. There are three of us, my oldest sister, and if you looked at one of those picture dictionaries for children, next to big sister might be a picture of a concentration camp director. The next is my brother, might be a picture of a collaborator. And then there was me. And I just was always the baby of the family. And I thought I grew up, and I got to be 37. I was on my second marriage and pregnant with my first child. And I called my parents to say, hey, I'm having a baby. Now, my older brother and sister, and my brother's only 2 years older than me, and my sister's only 2 years older than him, they had had children maybe 10 years before, and it was all, oh, give us grandchildren, give us grandchildren. So I call my dad, and I say, I'm having a baby. And he says, oh, my God, I got to sit down. I wasn't ready for this. And then my parents were getting older. I'm in my 40s, and we go to talk to them about their family will. You know, my dad's one of these Texans who's like, my mother wrote it in her own handwriting on the back of an envelope. I'll write mine on the back of an envelope. And we said, you know, I think maybe that worked for your mother, but these days you might need a handwriting expert. Why don't we get you a real will? So my brother had taken his handwritten will and took it to a lawyer here in Houston, and my sister had been the executrix on the handwritten will. And by the time we got to the family reunion to talk about it, my brother was the executor. So there was this thing going on. Remember, I'm in my 40s. There's this thing going on. And they finally decide, okay, we'll be co-executors. And I'm like, and what about me? You know? I mean, I'm not that far behind you. How come I can't be a co-executor? You know, it's kind of like, you're the baby. And I admit that I had a nighttime bottle. I'm not sure if it was till I was 5 or 7. I think I might be getting Alzheimer's. Yeah. And I believed in Santa Claus till I was in the 6th grade. But, you know, some of us late bloomers actually mature by the time we were in our 40s. So my father had become ill, and he had died, and my mother was living actually here in Houston in independent living. And I was living in the Northeast. I mean, when you're the baby of the family, sometimes you have to run away to feel like a grown-up. So everybody else is in Texas. I'm up in the Northeast, and I am down in Texas for a meeting, and I get a call from my brother. I was actually going to come over here to Houston and visit my mother, and he said, just want to let you know, Mom wasn't answering the phone this morning, and I let myself into her apartment. And she was lying on the floor, unresponsive, and I'm following the ambulance now to the hospital. I said, okay. And I'm a physician, I should add this piece. And so I called my sister who lives in San Antonio, and I said, you know, Jane, I think we need to go over there. And she's like, oh, you know, I'm at work, and, you know, you have to take a lot of I said, Jane, your mom is going into the ICU, and something's wrong with her. I think now's the time to go. Okay, my concentration camp director? Yeah. And so she and I drive over, and my mother had had a major stroke. She had something called Wernicke's aphasia, where she can't find the word for something, like she would call a watch arugula. And we're talking to doctors and checking on nursing homes and looking at PT units, and that's Saturday morning to Sunday night. My sister goes back to San Antonio, and my mother, in the meantime, had been doing worse. She would go into renal failure, and they would give her fluids, and then she would go into heart failure, and then they would give her diuretics, and she would go into renal failure, and this is this cycle that kind of goes down. And so Monday morning, my brother drops me off at the hospital, and I walk in, and she had had what we call a nasal cannula for oxygen. And she was beginning to have more serious breathing problems. And so they said, we need to put on what we call a 100% oxygen face mask. So I said, okay. And being a physician, I understand that this is not a good sign. And so I said, okay. And they said to me, you know, the next step will be a respirator. I said, I understand. And so I call my brother. I mean, I'm the baby. How can I make a decision? And I call my brother, and I said, you know, the next step would be a respirator, and I don't think she would want that. And I think that her health is not going to tolerate this. And he said, well, you know, they had this other thing. It's called a continuous positive airway pressure thing. He said they had this CPAP thing that they tried on her. Maybe we could do that. And if you've ever seen a CPAP, it's extremely uncomfortable. So I said, okay, hey, I'm the baby. You're the older ones. And so I came back in the room and I said, why don't we try CPAP? And the respiratory technicians came in with the machine. It's very loud and it's very horrible. And my mother looked at me, and although she couldn't speak, in her eyes, she said to me, it's okay, you can do this. And so I looked at the respiratory technicians and the nurses, and I said, we'll go to comfort care. And I did two things during the comfort care. I knew that my mother was very religious, and they said, yes, she had the last rites when she came in. And I said, I want to see the priest come in and give her the last rites. I just need to see that. And I had brought her this gray silk scarf from Italy because she loved elegant things. And I hadn't been able to give it to her in person yet because of everything that had gone on. So I laid it over her. And I guess it was about 8 hours before she passed away. And when I realized it would be about 20 or 30 more minutes, I called my brother and said, it'll be about 20 or 30 more minutes. He lived about 15 minutes away. And he went through this, we just put the water on to boil for the spaghetti. And I thought, you know what? I'm the baby. I've always been the baby. But in that moment, as my mother passed, and with her permission, I aged out of being the baby.